The McBride case involved a man named Bill McBride who was shopping in a Menards store with his wife, and they wanted to buy some of those large plastic bins that people use for storage. And they want to buy two, but there's only one on the shelf. They ask a store employee to help them, and it just happens to be an employee who was passing through the area. And he said he'd help them, and then he came up with this idea about how to get things off the shelf that is not something anyone had ever heard of before. He found some boxes of unopened merchandise so that he could use these boxes as like a landing pad to bring the merchandise down off of the high shelf. It didn't work, not surprisingly. The bins fell and they struck Bill in the head. Within a couple hours of getting home, Bill developed your classic brain injury symptoms. Louise, his wife, rushed him to the hospital. Ultimately, what happened to Bill, despite 2 days of heroic medical care, is that they were not able to save him, and the brain bleed caused a brain swell, which then caused him to pass. Bill and Louise McBride are two of the most extraordinary great-grandparents I've ever met in my life and probably will ever meet in my life. Until I had met Louise McBride, I had never heard of a great-grandparent raising two young children. And that's what they were doing at the time that Bill died. I was confident that we had established that Menards was responsible here for two reasons. That number one, the employee who dropped the bins did something that was unprecedented. He didn't mean for it to happen, but it was negligence, as the law defines that term. And I was also confident, number two, that we had established that Menards had failed to adequately train this employee, or really any of their employees, about how to safely retrieve merchandise from a high shelf. He was set up to fail. He wanted to help these folks, and he made a mistake. So I had thought that Menards would accept responsibility for one or both of these conclusions, but they refused to. They even refused to admit that Bill had been injured, or that he needed medical care, or amazingly, that he even died. And so that meant there was only one way to resolve this case, and it was to try it to a jury. The jury first had to decide whether Menards was going to be accountable for what happened. And they said yes. They found that the employee was, as the law would call, negligent, which just means failing to use reasonable care. Then they separately found that Menards was negligent for its failure to adequately train its employees. And so then the judge told them they had to divide that 100% responsibility of fault between the employee and Menards. They gave 1% of fault to the employee and 99% of fault to Menards. Then they had to go on to conclude what amount of money was appropriate, an appropriate measure of the many different types of harms and losses in the case. And the total number was about $4,600,000. I think what's significant about this result is that it clearly puts to rest a lot of very trite stereotypes that we hear of in this practice. We hear things like, this is from maybe insurance defense lawyers or insurance people themselves, that cases involving injuries or deaths to older people aren't worth that much, or that juries in small rural counties are not willing to render a large verdict. And this is the perfect example, one of many, of proving that cases are not about stereotypes. They are about the human beings involved, the human being that is your client and the human beings on a jury. And so when insurance people want to generalize about human beings, they should look at this case. Yeah, $4.6 million is a lot of money. It's probably the largest verdict in the history of the county. But it's not about the dollar sign or the dollar sign relative to other cases. To me, it's an acknowledgement that insurance people and their lawyers who try to generalize about people and about communities do so at their own peril. This case is an example of proving what I think is the most important thing, which is that if you are fortunate to represent an incredible person, then you may be able to get an incredible result on their behalf. And Louise McBride, like so many of the people we represent, is an extraordinary human being. And all I could do to try to honor and pay homage to what she was doing is to just do my best. And I think that embodies what I think the law firm is fortunate to be able to do, which is to stand up for extraordinary people like that. And if you're lucky to represent one of those people, you do everything you can because that's what they deserve.